This is where most of the deception and misinformation for Dr. Harry's argument lies.
And I assume what's going to pop up is that determinists like to use a neuroscientific argument that's really built upon Benjamin Libet's findings. It's really from the 1980s, and the field of neuroscience has actually moved beyond this. So it's a minority opinion, the idea that neuroscience has actually proven that your brain is determined or your thoughts are determined. This is not the universal opinion of the field. It's actually a minority opinion. And so Libet himself actually says that his research did not prove this, and therefore insinuating that the brain is already determined before the action occurs. And so I referenced everybody to go look up David Schroeder's 2012 article. It's titled RP as Neural Noise, RP meaning resting potential. And so the majority of the field believes that whatever was happening is just neural noise, and actually the premise that neuroscience has highlighted that everything is deterministic, that is not a majority consensus.
Okay. First off, there's no paper by a David Schroeder named RP as Neural Noise. I tried searching all over for it and I found nothing. The paper I think he is referring to, though, is this 2012 paper by Aaron Schroeder titled An Accumulator Model for Spontaneous Neural Activity Prior to Self-Initiated Movement. Bit of a mouthful. This paper does critique the Libet study, but not in the way that Patrick presents. Let me break it down, but first I'll go through the Libet study quickly so you'll see exactly what I mean. In 1983, Benjamin Libet conducted an experiment to measure the timing of a person's conscious experience with brain activity. He wanted to know how closely linked the conscious mind was to the measured brain activity for movement. This brain activity for movement is called readiness potential, not resting potential, as Patrick says. In the Libet study, he hooked up participants to an EEG machine and asked them to flex their wrist whenever they felt like doing so. He asked them to observe a moving clock as well at the same time, so the participants could tell when they precisely became aware of the desire to flex their wrist. And then he measured when they did the action of flexing their wrist, along with when it came inside the EEG machine. Now, Libet expected the conscious awareness to either precede or coincide with the timing of the readiness potential. But he was surprised to find out that the readiness potential came before the person's conscious awareness, not after. Libet ran this experiment several times, and the average timing for things went like so. First, the readiness potential started to amp up 550 milliseconds prior to the movement. Then 350 milliseconds later, just 200 milliseconds before the movement, the person becomes aware of their decision to move their wrist. He names this W time, or willingness time. Then at T0, or time zero, the person makes the movement and flexes their wrist. The aftermath of the experiment had many claiming that there is no free will, and everyone is controlled by their unconscious self. While his work does point in favor of this conclusion, Libet himself saw issues with his own experiment, and many have done similar tests since then and show that this conclusion is not firmly founded. Libet, like any good scientist, talks about two issues with his test. First, he says that there may be a veto power where a person can choose to go against the movement they were going to do. He even tried measuring this supposed veto power, but that experiment has been critiqued because he asked participants to basically pretend to flex their wrist, but end up not doing it. The issue in this being that the participant is being asked to intend to do something while ultimately knowing they will not be doing said thing. The second issue he highlights is the idea that doing something simple, like flexing your wrist, is nothing like the process of thinking deeply about a hard decision. Perhaps the decision to move your wrist is so simple that your body takes the lead before you're consciously aware. But to say this kind of process applies to your decision to propose to someone or to accept a new job offer, that seems fishy. It seems like these kinds of decisions would be more in our control. So we should not apply the outcome of the Libet study to these more complex decisions. It is these 2 points that Aaron Schroeder's follow-up study set out to answer. Now, Schroeder did a similar experiment to Libet and found that a veto power does exist and that there is a time following that moment where the action will always happen, a point of no return, where no matter what, by this point in the decision process, if the person has not vetoed it, the person will always flex their wrist. Schruger deems this a threshold where once the amplitude of the readiness potential reaches a certain amount, the action will always happen. Now, the timing of the veto power, or the free won't, as others have called it to be, is heavily contested. Some suggest this can only happen before a person is consciously aware of the decision in their mind, in which the choice to not move is still an unconsciously decided choice. But other studies like Schruger's suggest that this choice not to move can happen after the person becomes consciously aware. This is all difficult to know because the timing of the person's conscious awareness is subjective. It's based on the person marking down when they feel some sort of urge to flex their hand. When we are talking about milliseconds, that is a difficult thing to be precise about. So this point of veto power is widely debated, and Schruger himself acknowledges this. This is where things get crazy. The other thing that Schruger found is that the readiness potential might not be an unconscious decision to move. The spark in brain activity might be more like activity that is just always happening, always going on in the background, but sparks up and down at certain points, and once it reaches a certain point, causes the movement. In his model, the stochastic accumulator, this measures the readiness potential brain activity. And here he points out the readiness potential as ongoing, spontaneous fluctuations of neural activity. Basically, the readiness potential is always ramping up and down in amplitude, but movement occurs when the amplitude reaches a certain point. This movement is more based on reaching that amplitude than the conscious awareness. So the conclusion is that the decision to flex your wrist is less about an unconscious decision triggering a conscious decision, which triggers a movement. No. It's just random brain activity that reaches a certain threshold, and that causes the movement. The flexing of the wrist is randomly done, not consciously chosen. So Patrick's paper that supposedly proves his point about free will actually shows that we have no choice when making simple movements. It's just random. This is such a bad argument, but it works because people don't have time to read 10 plus page academic papers. It's honestly embarrassing. I want to believe you, but when you straight up lie to prove your point, it makes it hard to respect you in the debate. Neuroscience has not come to any clear consensus about free will. And even if it showed that we have willpower over our unconscious choices, this would still fail to prove free will. It would just prove emergentism, that our conscious awareness does affect our choices. The question of whether our life experiences and biology affect our perspective and conscious desires is still untouched. And if those remain caused, as physics seems to suggest, then there's still no free will. There's still no choosing otherwise. If you like this clip, well, you can watch the whole thing right here. Or you can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for Truth and Tradition. I'll see you guys there.